So this is week 2. Do you know what I love about Christmas? You get to church and you're like, I already know what they're going to talk about. It's either going to be the birth of Jesus or the birth of Jesus. It's either going to be the wise men or the shepherds. And maybe you step in and you're like, I hope it's the shepherds. I'm sick and tired of hearing about the wise men. I know there wasn't 3 wise men. I know it was 3 gifts. There was probably more. And I love that we get to chat about the wise men this Christmas. You're thinking, oh no, but Anthony talked about the wise men last week. What? We're talking about the wise men again? Yeah, because the wise men gave 3 gifts. Yes? And we have 3 weeks in Christmas. So what we're doing is we're looking very intentionally and very detailed at the gifts that the wise men gave. Anthony done a fantastic job last week talking about the gift of gold. Has anybody received the gift of gold this week? No? The mic's not on. Today I want to talk about frankincense. So, do you know that smell is a great trigger memory? That there's something that when it comes to the scent, when it comes to the smell, it's one of the strongest things that will trigger a memory back to us. Okay, so I Googled it. It said you have nerves called olfactory nerves that are connected to what's called the limbic system. You all know your limbic system? Yes, excellent. Which controls emotions and even motivation. Okay, I have many stories. I remember there was a time I was in Australia. I spent 15 months in Australia and I was driving home. I remember coming down, getting closer to home, and a smell struck me. And it was the nicest smell that I ever smelled. And I'm like, this smell reminds me of home. And it was the smell of slurry. For some of you, you're like, Niall, you're a weirdo. And for other people, you're like, I know what you mean. There's something about a smell. And even as I'm talking there's something in you that's bringing you back to that time, that there's a certain smell, there's a certain moment, there's a certain situation where you're like, I remember walking into my grandmother's kitchen and the smell of warm cooked apple pie. I always know when Ruth loves me very much. When I walk home and I can smell a sizzling steak, I'm like, she really loves me, she's done something wrong, or she's asking me, can she spend money? And I'm like, I'm just going to enjoy this aroma. Okay, so can I give you the title of my message? The title of my message is called The Power of a Sentimental Gift. See what I done there? If that's all you get from this, I'm happy. And there was a story in 1903, okay? In 1903, you may know this story, but you may not. Just go with me. It was December the 17th, and that's to be exact, and there was 2 young men from North Carolina. And they'd done something that was so historic, that would revolutionize the way we travel. And they were called the Wright brothers. And what they had done is they had flown just a small bit off the ground. And they decided they were going to contact their sister Catherine in Ohio. And this is what they said. They said, we have flown 120 feet. And then they added a little footnote to the very bottom of this telegram. And it said, we will be home for Christmas. Catherine was so excited, she ran down to the local newsagent, or to the local newspaper, the local editor, and she gave them the telegram. And the editor read it, and he put it out, and he says, how wonderful it is, the boys will be home for Christmas. Isn't it amazing that he missed the most important thing, and he focused on the footnote? And I think so often, especially when it comes to Christmas, we look over the fact that Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, was born as a baby in a manger. And we cover it with gifts, we cover it with presents, we cover it with parties, we cover it with all of this superfluous stuff. And we're missing out on the main thing. And the reality is, the main thing is Jesus Christ. that God of heaven would lower himself and come to earth. So what I want to do with our time this morning, again, we're talking about the wise men. We're looking at the gift of frankincense. Have you ever received the gift of frankincense? Has anybody ever seen frankincense? Okay. It'd be good. Let's jump into scripture, okay? Matthew 2:7-11, it says, "Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared." I'm reading from my notes because I can't see through Christmas trees. Okay. "He sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him.'" Verse 9 says, "After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, of frankincense, and of myrrh." So what we see here is we see that there was 3 gifts given, and these 3 gifts, they were valuable. Not only were they valuable, they were also incredibly practical. And then even deeper than that, they were valuable, they were practical, but they also held a deeper spiritual meaning. So that's what we're going to look at this morning. We're going to look at the gift of frankincense, what it means, why they gave a gift that had such sentimentality to them. Okay, I'll pull this apart. This will make sense. So firstly, I want to look at the guys that gave the gift. Ant's done some of this last week, and I know some of you are like, well, I can switch off for the next 5 minutes. No, because I'm going to challenge you that I'm going to give you some information this morning that you may never have heard before. That's a bold statement, okay? I could fall flat on my face, but it's okay. So the 3 wise men, we know that there wasn't 3 wise men. We know that it could have been more. We know that they were called magi. So the Greek word for magi is very hard to translate into English. That's why we have the word wise men, okay? So we know that we're from the Medo-Persian Empire. And there was a historian back in the day called Herodotus. Now, if I have another son, I'm going to call my son that. Herodotus. Isn't that a beautiful name? It's an amazing name. I might even call my girl that. I don't. And so he wrote, and he had a historical kind of background into where these would have came from. So when we look at the Jewish priestly system, we had the Jews, and then within that we had the 12 tribes. And one of the tribes were called the Levites, okay? And the Levites were given the responsibility of being the ones that would represent the people before God. They were the priestly tribe. And scholars and theologians believe that this group of wise men, called the Magi, were actually the priestly tribe of their Medo-Persian kind of hierarchy, stuff like that. Okay, are you with me so far? I'm getting somewhere. So we need to go back in time. So we need to go back to the time of Daniel, to the Babylonian Empire. So the Babylonian Empire was probably the superpower at the time, and it was King Nebuchadnezzar. And within this, okay, we had the satraps, the astrologers, the magicians, all of these high-ranking people that would have been around the king. And a lot of theologians believe that the Magi, that the tribal group, the Magi, were within this sphere. And what we see Daniel, who was a Jew, who was in the court of the king, King Nebuchadnezzar. What happened was he rose to rank. He rose in prominence over all of the magicians, the astrologers, the Magi, or the magicians, okay? And then what happened? King Nebuchadnezzar, he was here. Then King Darius came on the scene. And King Darius, he decided that he wanted a one-world religion. And I think it was called Zoology or something like that. And it was where everybody would come and they would worship one God. And what happened was, because the Magi, the wise men, the priestly nation, okay, because they were funded and provided for by the king, a lot of them would have come underneath this new world religion. But there was a certain sect, or there was a certain group of these that they would have been exposed to the scriptures that Daniel would have brought in. Because we know that Daniel, he stood strong, he stood firm, and he loved well. He didn't bow to the culture, he didn't bow to any other god. So what we see is that when King Darius brought in this new world religion, we can see that there was a sect, or that there was a group of the Magi that would have leaned towards the God of David. You with me? Excellent. You with me? So let's fast forward. So we have these wise men out of the blue for no reason. They're traveling all this way to meet a baby in a manger because they believe that he is the coming Messiah. Do you know what's so interesting about this? Is that these would have been Gentiles. And they were so keenly aware that the Messiah was going to be born, that even when Jesus came, his own people didn't even know. So we have these wise men. The reason they would have brought the gift of frankincense, okay, I'm tying it all up in a nice little bow. And the reason they would have brought frankincense is because they were the high priests, like the Levites, of their day, of their tribe. And they would have been the ones that would have had to go in and do all the sacrifices, burn all the incense. So they would have understood that the gift of frankincense, that as the aromas rose to heaven, that it symbolized something. And because they listened to the scriptures that Daniel shared, because the truth was revealed to them of Daniel's God, something took hold in them, that they were looking for a sign. How many people do you know are always looking for a sign? Lord, if you want me to do the lotto, let me see the lotto. Lord, if you want me to do, Lord, if you want me to marry that girl, just give me a sign that a blue car will pass by. Lord, and we have all these things. So these wise men were looking for a sign. The reason they brought frankincense, it may seem like a ridiculous gift. When me and Ruth had kids, we were never given frankincense. Junior, if I give you frankincense for one of your kids, you're like, what's up with him? Like, we were given doties, we were given onesies, we were given teddies. We were even given the odd bottle of gripe water. If you know what gripe water is, fantastic. If not, they don't sell it anymore. So there's some gifts that are very practical, but there's some gifts that are very sentimental. And again, this gift of frankincense, it foreshadowed, it prophesied who Jesus would be to you and I. Okay? So we built the framework. Let's go. Frankincense, in a sense, is a Swiss Army knife of a gift. There's so many uses to it. Frankincense oil possesses I was struggling with that. It's just antiseptic. It possesses antiseptic, astringent, carminative, diuretic, digestive, sedative, uterine, and vulnerary therapeutic properties. Did you know that? You knew that anyway. I don't know what that means, but I just have extra time during the week that I get to Google all of this stuff. So we see that it was a very valuable gift. But I don't just want to look at the properties that it possessed. I want to look at the fact that it foreshadowed who Jesus would be. So if gold was a prophetic thing that Jesus is the King of Kings, then what is frankincense? Frankincense symbolizes that Jesus is our high priest. That in the Old Testament, when we look at it, there was And there was the Levite tribe that would have went in, and they would have represented the people of God before God. That they would have came in and they would have done sacrifices, they would have offered different things onto the Lord for the forgiveness of sins of the people. So the priests essentially would be representatives of God before people and had two primary roles. The first one was the priest had to make sacrifices for the forgiveness of sins. So what they would do is they would take an innocent animal, and they would kill the animal, and that they would have the blood that would represent the forgiveness of people's sins. And then the second thing that they would do is they prayed prayers on behalf of the people of God. So what we have here is we have an intermediate, that they were the ones that would represent the people before God. But when Jesus came, He came as our high priest. And what we see that as time goes on, as Jesus matures, as Jesus grows, as he does his earthly ministry, we see that when Jesus dies and he goes to heaven, that Jesus fulfills this role of the high priest. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm so thankful that Jesus done this. So, maybe you're thinking, why do I need a high priest? I'm doing pretty well on my own. And there's a word that some of us don't like hearing. In fact, there's a word that some people would rather us take out of church because it's very outdated. It's very old school. And it's a very simple word. And here's the thing. We all struggle with it. It's sin. And what happened when we look back at the Garden of Eden, we see that there was the holiness of God and the sinfulness of mankind. So we need to understand that if God is a holy God, that he needs to be separate from the sinfulness of mankind. Here's the reality. We're all sinful. Oh, no, I'm a good person. No, we're all sinful. We all sin and we all fall short of the glory of God. Who's glad they came to church this morning? I went to church and he told me I'm a big fat sinner. It's okay. We all... And what happens is we can camp out there and we can be like, actually, no, I'm not. I do enough good deeds. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do more good than I do bad. Or, well, is that really a sin? And the reality is, when we stand before a holy God, he can't have anything to do with sin. So he didn't leave us in our sinful way. He made a way because God is 100% holy, but he's also 100% just. So I'm getting somewhere, don't you worry. So there's the holiness of God and the sinfulness of mankind. And if we don't understand the holiness of God, what will happen is we will always have a casual approach to sin. So if we don't understand how holy, how just God is, what happens is we're like, well, I don't sin as bad as they do. Or I know what they do, and what they do is much worse than what I do. But the reality is, it's not about that. And here's the thing. We can never have a casual approach to sin. Because what happens is it just opens the door to one or two things. And then it becomes something so big that we live in a day and age where you would rather people think that you have it all together than to come forward. Because you're like, I don't know if I can trust people. Or I need to show people that I have it all together. And that's so debilitating. Like you're trying to live the perfect life. And God never asked you to live the perfect life. He just asked you to accept the one who did live the perfect life. So we look at this Greek word holy. It comes from the word agios, which means separate. So God is transcendently separate. God is perfect in every single way. God is holy. He's flawless. He is pure. There is no fault. There is no wrong in God. His power is holy. His grace is holy. His mercy is holy. Everything about God is holy. His purity, his separateness. And that makes him worthy of our praise. That as we gather here on a Sunday, as we step into this place, that just because God is 100% holy, majestic, pure, he deserves our praise. And sometimes our praise is like, thank you, yeah, I appreciate that. It's understanding who he is. Okay, so some of you might be like, Niall, you've lost me. I don't know where you're going with this. This is all going to wrap up at the very end, so don't worry. So God is holy, and our challenge is we're not. So let's look at the high priest in the Old Testament. Once a year, there was a time or a festival called the Day of Atonement, or you may have heard Yom Kippur. And what happens is that day, that the high priest would come and they would sacrifice an animal. They would take the blood of the animal and they would sacrifice it for the sins of the people. But there was another thing. Have you ever heard of the term a scapegoat? So the word scapegoat derives from this time. So the priest would take a goat. It would be an innocent goat, and it would confess the sins of the people onto the goat. And what they would do is they would run the goat into the wilderness or off a cliff. That it was a sacrifice that goat took on him or her the sins of the people. He became a scapegoat. And then they would come and they would take whatever animal and they would do all of the necessary rituals that needed to be observed before a holy God. And one of these rituals that they would have to do is they would have to take frankincense. So if you read Leviticus, I know most people would read Leviticus around this time of the year. Leviticus 2:2, it says that they took frankincense. And what happens was they would burn it. And the aroma, the scent would go up to heaven. And that the Father in heaven, he will be pleased by this scent. Isn't that amazing? I think that is amazing. That when the wise men were choosing the gifts, that there was a sentimental edge to the fact of why they brought frankincense. That it foreshadowed that Jesus Christ was going to be our high priest. That the sacrifice that needed to be done every single year, that when Jesus would die, when Jesus went to the cross, that would be fulfilled. The sacrifice justifies God's justness, and at the same time it extends mercy to you and I. In Hebrews 10:10 it says, and by that we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. So here's the thing. We're not holy in and of ourselves. We are holy because Jesus Christ is holy. So what happens is if you think of a robe, okay? And so this is my lovely robe I bought from Penny's. And it's nice. But if you look at all these different patterns, a lot of these different patterns can be sin, shame, guilt, broken, all of this stuff. And when God looks at me when I accept Jesus, he doesn't see me in my broken, sinful state. What happens is because God has accredited it to me as righteousness, he now puts a cloak on me. So that when he looks from heaven, he sees that I am holy, not because of me. You hear that? Not because of me. I'm still Niall. I'm still a big fat sinner. But because of what Jesus done, because of what Jesus accredited to me, God now sees me through that lens. God now sees me through that prism. That's magnificent. That is worthy of praise. So our high priest, Jesus, he gave his life to satisfy the justness of God. It says in Hebrews 4:14-15, is Jesus the great high priest. It says, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. In every way, Jesus was tempted. And he didn't sin. So when we look at our lives, when we look at everything that we go through, Jesus, he suffered. We look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And the anxiety was great within him. He started to sweat drops of blood. If you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with anxiety, Jesus knows. Jesus was tempted. It wasn't the first day of the 40. It was at the end of the 40 days in the wilderness. And the enemy came and tempted him. Do you know, every family has a crazy person. If your family has a crazy person, put up your hands. The great news is if you didn't put up your hands, you're the crazy person. And there's a lot of you. Can you imagine Jesus going and saying to I heard a comedian say one day that imagine being Jesus' younger brother, and they're like, you're called Jesus Christ, but you're not called James Christ. I know, I thought that was funny. Okay, imagine Jesus going and saying, do you know what? I'm the Messiah. I'm James. We're great, but I'm God. It's like, no, you're not. They would have thought he was a lunatic. So the reason I say that, Jesus understands. Jesus is able to empathize. Jesus is sympathetic. He's our sympathetic high priest. He understands everything because he went through everything. And here's the thing, he didn't sin. God, he is our king. So when we look at gold, he's the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. When we look at the frankincense, our high priest. And then on Christmas morning, we're going to look at myrrh. And maybe it's not a Christmas morning message, but it's our suffering servant. It's the Lamb of God. And we look at all of these things of who Jesus is. And the reality is for you and me here on December the 10th in Tullow, 2023, and we need to understand that in Hebrews 4:16 it says, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. This is it. This is what it all boils down to. That because Jesus is our sympathetic high priest, because Jesus is able to empathize, because Jesus knows every single thing that we go through, every single fear, every single trial, temptation, everything, because Jesus knows. He said that now, because I have fulfilled that sacrificial duty, that you can come boldly before the throne of grace. And I think sometimes we're like, what? We feel like we can't come to God. And the great thing is that the high priests in the old days, they were a mediator between people of God and God. Now Jesus is sitting at the right hand of the Father and he is interceding on our behalf. What does that mean? It says that Jesus is praying on our behalf, that when we pray, we don't need to go to anybody else to pray. We can go directly to the Father in heaven. And Jesus is there and he's like, yeah, Father, yeah, I know them, yeah. He's there for us. How amazing is that? When we grasp the magnitude of that, our prayers should change. And I think so often we want to come before the throne of grace, but we don't want to deal with our stuff. Lord, I bring my crying baby to you today. I just pray, Lord, a gobstopper would have been a great gift. Wouldn't it? So we will find mercy for the past and we will find grace for the present and future. So when we come to the throne of grace, when we step into that place, we will find mercy for the past. That because Niall is a great big fat sinner, because Niall has gotten it wrong, because Niall is not perfect, God extends mercy for my past. And then for this present and for the future, grace is distributed. Grace is doled out. So I hope you understand that you can come to him today. I'm going to ask the worship team to come back. And again, look, maybe this isn't a Christmas type message. Maybe you were hoping for a little bit more hope, a little bit more peace. But the reality is, I know that people are carrying stuff. When we were handing out the hampers yesterday, honestly, getting to look at the whites in people's eyes, they were just so thankful. And here's the thing, sometimes people, they're not in need financially, but maybe the need of their heart is so great that they just want to know that they're not on their own. Maybe they just need to know that there is somebody there for them. I've got your wife. I've got your wife, Mike. I've got your wife, Mike. I've got your Mike wife. It's tough. Can I get you all to stand? I want to do something a little different today. It says that we can come boldly before the throne of grace, the throne of heaven. I want us to do that this morning. Remember, frankincense, it was that scent-orientated gift. It would symbolize that Jesus is our high priest. It symbolizes that now there is no longer a yearly sacrifice needed. The debt has been paid. It has been paid in full. But for a lot of us, we hold on with stuff. And maybe you're far from God. Maybe you're not far from God. Maybe you just don't understand. Maybe you do understand how great God is, how much His mercy and His grace is, but you just haven't been leaning into it. So there's a couple of things that I want to give you this morning. Maybe you're struggling financially. Maybe this time of Christmas, the pressure is so real, the pressure is so heavy because you're like, everybody is spending. Everybody's gone crazy with money. You're like, I just don't have the money. I was talking to a lady yesterday and she said years ago that they were given a gift and it was a bag of potatoes. I said, you have no idea the significance that meant to our family. A bag of potatoes. And there's people spending thousands getting in debt for Christmas. And maybe you're carrying that weight this morning. Jesus, our high priest, He is our provider. He will meet all of your needs. So maybe you're that person, you're struggling financially at the moment. Maybe you're hurting emotionally. Maybe there's grief. Maybe there's loss, there's pain, whatever it is. It says that we can cast all our cares onto Him. Because He cares deeply about us. Remember, we have mercy for the past and we have grace for the present and the future. Maybe you're here, you're struggling physically. Maybe you're tired, you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed. Well, whatever it is, whatever the cry of your heart is this morning, whatever that weight is, whatever that pain is, whatever you're carrying, will you consider